Hello and welcome to this video, and in this video I'm going to be looking at some of my favourite albums from the decade 2000 to 2010, the noughties. Okay, now my album buying diminished quite a bit after the year 2000. There's a variety of reasons for this. One of them is that I was right in the middle of sort of my professional career, so I wasn't listening to as much music. I was involved in making albums myself by that point, so I was listening to a lot of that stuff. The albums I've got in that decade are a lot less representative of that decade than earlier on. But I've gone through and I've pulled out some of the albums I did buy, and more importantly, I've pulled out albums by artists that I haven't discussed before. That's the most important thing, is to get in some of these artists that we haven't mentioned yet. But I'm going to start with this album by an artist that I have mentioned a lot, and the reason I pulled it out because I think it's perhaps my favourite album from the last 20 years by this guy, and that would be, of course, John McGuffin. There he is, or John McGuffin. People don't like me saying Gofflin, so I'll call it John McGuffin. McGuffin? I don't know. Anyway, 5-piece band, which is the album he made with Chick Corea. This is an incredible album, and I think because it's live, it's absolutely burning. The lineup is sublime. Chick Corea, John McGuffin, Kenny Garrett, perhaps the greatest living alto sax player on the planet, Christian McBride, a virtuoso on electric bass, a virtuoso on double bass, incredible player, and Vinnie Colaiuta on drums. One of my favourite drummers, the drummer that really had a profound influence on me as I was coming up, and as a guest appearance from Herbie Hancock as well. So this is something else. Really brilliant album. I think what's interesting is hearing John McGuffin playing other people's compositions. There's Chick Corea compositions as well, and hearing Chick play on McGuffin. I can't do it anymore. On McGuffin tracks. I think that's what's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear Vinnie and John McGuffin together as well, because I think that's a match made in heaven. You know, John McGuffin, I was watching an interview by Dennis Chambers yesterday, and he said it's fun to be in a band where the guitarist knows more about time signatures than the drummer, and that's the case. But Vinnie knows more about time signatures than anybody else on the planet. So it's an incredible album. So that's one that you should check out, an obvious one. And here's one I pulled out as well, is this. It's called Visions of the Inner Mounting Apocalypse, right? And this album was sort of pulled together by Mike Varney, who made a lot of those sort of metal guitar through to fusion albums, you know, around that time and earlier. It's got an incredible lineup of musicians taking on various tracks by the Mahavishnu. It's nice because they rework them. Same as the Mahavishnu project. Anyone who hasn't checked out my interview with Greg Bendian, go and do it now, because there's a lot of talk about this idea of going back and revisiting these classic jazz standards, really, that get ignored by the snobby jazz fraternity. And that's what they do here. And it's not just Mahavishnu tracks. There's some other John McGuffin compositions. I see there's Jeff Richmond appears on Jazz, which is off the later 80s Mahavishnu, which is quite interesting. Some classic Mahavishnu tunes: Birds of Fire, Can't Stand Your Funk, Celestial Terrestrial Commuters, Meeting of the Spirits, Dawn, Lila's Dance Face, Dance of Maya, Follow Your Heart. Of course, Follow Your Heart is not a Mahavishnu tune, it's from an earlier album, first cropped up on Extrapolation, and then it appeared again on My Goals Beyond acoustic guitar version, but the best version is on the Joe Farrell album, if you haven't heard that. The guitarists on here and the guests are quite incredible. Steve Lukather, Mike Stern, Steve Morse, Jimmy Herring, Jeff Richmond, Frank Gambari, Warren Haynes, Dave Fizinski, Greg Howe and John Abercrombie. The lineup is Vinnie Colaiuta, Kayak Card on bass, Mitchell Foreman on keyboards, Jeff Richmond on guitars, and guest appearance from Jerry Goodman. It's an interesting album. It doesn't get mentioned that much, and you know, there's been so much stuff on the Mahavishnu on this channel. I thought I really needed to pull that out. I can't remember what year it's from. I think it's around about 2000, something like that. The writing on CDs is far too small for me to read. Look at that. How are you supposed to read that? But anyway, that's my second album. Right, let's get into the more weirder stuff. Weirder and more wonderful stuff. So here's an album from, I think, around about 2005, something like that. And it's by the guitarist John Paul Borelli. And the album is called Transatlantic Boom Bop 2. Right? This is fusion unlike anything else you've ever heard. Really interesting album. It's mixed really weird. The sounds are really weird. The approach is very interesting. It's like sort of Islamic music mixed with electronic, mixed with fusion. Jean-Paul Borelli is a very interesting guitar player. He's somewhere between Jimi Hendrix and free jazz Ferry Saunders. He's somewhere in between there. There's quite a few guitarists that occupy that space. I'm thinking of James Bonoma, for example, or even Sonny Sharrock, you know, these free guitarists. John Paul Borelli is a little bit more grounded than those players, but he's a very interesting player. It's not about chops, it's about something else, about vibe. This is a really fantastic album. And I think it features Dennis Chambers on drums as well. And that just gives it an edge. The rest of the guys, like, they've got Henry Threadgill on here, Reggie Workman, Alou Dara and Melvin Gibbs. They're all much more the avant-garde end of jazz and jazz fusion. Jazz fusion and free jazz. It occupies that territory. I find that very, very interesting. Again, I go back to that interview I just done with Greg Bendian. Free jazz really influenced fusion. That way of soloing is there all the way. It's in there with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. It's there with Tony Williams' Lifetime. You know, Chick Corea was playing with free jazz before he formed Return to Forever. And this album carries on in that tradition. This is a heavy album. This is not Fusac. This is something else. Right, so next album I pulled out is this one. Herbie Hancock. Right, Future to Future. This is like the sort of last Herbie Hancock album he made. He's not made much since then, really. And when he has made stuff, it's often been Joni Mitchell compositions and stuff like that. This is the last time Herbie Hancock really went into the studio and made a proper Herbie Hancock album. Now, Herbie Hancock sometimes makes acoustic jazz, but a lot of the time he's really dealing with the electronic production methods going on in pop and music at that time, and this is no different. He really takes on that sort of electronica, drum and bass, hip-hop on this album. It's produced by Bill Laswell. And if you don't know who Bill Laswell is, go and check my video out, because Bill Laswell is one of the most important people in the history of jazz fusion and an incredible producer, and he brings the Laswell production methods to this. Of course, Laswell is he became famous for his production on Herbie Hancock's single Rocket, you know, which basically changed the face of music and went beyond fusion, but actually influenced, you know, mainstream culture in terms of, you know, music and production. And here Herbie's doing all that type of thing. I think Chaka Khan appears on here as a guest, but I haven't, I'm really going on off my memory here. Let's see who's on here. And see, the trouble with CDs, I like to talk albums because I can just look and see who the lineup is, but I'm sure we've got an incredible lineup on here. Let's just have a look. So Charnett Moffat, the late Charnett Moffat, he died a few days ago. Absolutely incredible bass player. I nearly did a tribute to him. It's just I didn't know his stuff well enough to just come in and do one off the top of my head. But Charnett Moffat, you know, he will be missed immensely. Incredible player. Wayne Shorter's on here. Chaka Khan's on here. Karish Kale, Grandmaster DXT. You can tell it's a Laswell production. Carl Craig. You know, a mixture of all sorts of people, and even Laswell appears on electric bass on a couple of them. It's a great album. If you love Herbie Hancock, especially what he did, the funky stuff he did in the 70s, well, this is like a more recent, updated version of that. That's a great album. Right, we need to get a move on because I'm talking too much. We're halfway through the video. Right, Dave Binney, Balance. Again, not Fusac. They're really playing on here. They're pushing the envelope. This is experimental jazz fusion. This is hard to find at this point in time. There's not that many people making albums like that. The lineup is Dave Binney, alto saxophone, Wayne Krantz on guitar, the incredible Wayne Krantz, one of the great fusion guitarists of the last 20 years, Yuri Kane on piano, Tim Lefebvre, I never had to say his name, Lefebvre, you know, who's a fantastic bass player, and Jim Black on drums. There's a whole bunch of other guests on here. Tim Lefebvre and Dave Binney have cropped up in that sort of Noah Louis Cole circuit recently. They're still out there pushing the envelope, and this is a fantastic album. It's very influenced, not very, but an influence from sort of harmonics, from M-Bass, from Ornette Coleman. There's that there, and then full on 70s fusion. I think he says in the liner notes that he really wanted to make an album that sort of got into, you know, as he says, when composing the music for violence, I was hearing an electric sound and was listening to a lot of music that influenced me when I was a kid. George Duke, Stanley Clarke, Jan Hammer, Wayne Shorter, Weather Report, Lenny White, Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock. This is what this channel's about. So if you haven't heard this album, go and check it out. Okay, right, the next album I've got this. I don't know whether you would class this as fusion. It's pretty out there. This is an album called Comfortably Homeless by Marco Minneman. Marco Miniman is one of the technically most advanced drummers in the world at the moment. I know Marco pretty well. I used to do drum clinics with him. He actually gave me this album. He had a ton of albums that he made, and he said, Andy, you need to go and see this. So he listened to this one, and he personally gave me this one to listen to. I took it home, and it's one of the most densest, mathematically insane and avant-garde albums that Marco's made. You know, Marco's since gone on to, you know, play with Steve Wilson, he's played with Joe Satriani, and now he's sat quite comfortably in the Aristocrats, which is him, Guthrie Govan and Brian Bella, and that they are holding the torch for jazz fusion at the moment, although it's really on the rock side. But if you're used to that, then you go and check this album. He is doing something else on here. This is way out progressive jazz rock. That's all I can describe it by. And so yeah, and that's you know, was given to me by Marco. I toured with Marco a number of times in the old days, did lots of clinics with him, and I hope he's watching it, because he really influenced me and my drumming style. Just to see someone pushing the envelope technically was very interesting. Anyway, another drummer that I toured with back in 2000 was this guy, Simon Phillips. Right, there he is. And this is called Vantage Point. And he made it with Jeff Babco. And this is an acoustic, almost hard bop jazz album. Right, Simon Phillips at the moment is killing it, representing jazz fusion with his Protocol band. Protocol 5's out and everyone's talking about it. But here he goes back to his sort of jazz roots. And this is a fantastic album. Often with the fusion guys, there's that snotty sort of looking down their nose thing at what they do. So it's lovely to hear what it sounds like when they go and play jazz. There is fusion influence on here. There's an incredible drum solo on, I think it's Spirits of Train. Simon Phillips is an absolutely fantastic drummer. I toured with him. I did his UK drum clinic tour in 2000, and I spent the week with him, travelling from clinic to clinic, and it was like going to music school. I picked his brains about absolutely everything, and I think I learnt more in that week than I ever did doing anything else. Simon Phillips really is one of the greatest drummers that's ever lived, you know, that can go from heavy metal, like Judas Priest, Sin Has to Sin, you know, through prog all the way to a acoustic jazz trio. And the stuff he did with Hiromi is another artist around today that is really flying the flag for jazz fusion, and I need to do a video on Hiromi. In fact, I would say of modern fusion artists, I'd put Hiromi up as being the peak at the moment. She is unbelievably incredible. If you want to go back and check out Simon Phillips doing something much more jazzy, there we go. Right, I've got 3 to go. This is an interesting album, right? I don't know what the title of it. I think it's called Shortcuts. Anyway, there we go. It's a sort of supergroup that was put together by this, I think, Norwegian or Swedish saxophone player, is it? Let's have a look. Sometimes my brain does not keep up. Yeah, so Hans Ulrich is a tenor and soprano saxophone player, and I think he won a jazz award, and as part of the award he was allowed to put his own band together. So he pulls together a band which features Peter Erskine and Schofield, and then Lars Danielsson on bass. Lars Danielsson is a player that's worked on an ECM, so there's that European thing. So with Hans and him, you got that European jazz approach, and then with Schofield and Erskine, you've got that American jazz fusion approach. But both of those players are equally at home in both styles. I really like this because it's a chance to really hear Schofield play. He's not thinking about being a leader, he's a sideman, but he really just playing this. Some of Schofield compositions, and it's just a great album. Beautifully recorded, no messing around, no production trickery. Just 4 guys in the room playing. It's absolutely fantastic. Right. I wanted to pull these 2 out. These are the last 2 I want to look at now, because I know I've been slightly critical of them. The first I'll pull out is actually Dave Weckel. So it's the Dave Weckel band Multiplicity. Right, so I really like the Electric Band. The players in the Electric Band, you know, Scott Henderson, and then later on Frank Gambale, Dave Weckel and John Patitucci, were all made superstars by doing that band. Okay, and then they got signed and they came out on GRP, and their solo albums were equally successful. If you're taking on the influence of the Electric Band on Fusion, you'd have to also include the solo albums, which is interesting. It's the same thing with Return to Forever. If you're looking at that influence, you also have to take on these solo albums by Stanley Clarke, Aldo Meola and Lenny White. And it's the same with Weckel and Patitucci and Gambale. Those albums had an equal influence, but the GRP production style, as I've described elsewhere, really wimped them out a little bit. There's some playing on there, some good players, but I felt that production approach didn't show them off at their best. Since then, they've gone on to do fantastic things. Dave Weckel is another drummer that is just, it's just pure beauty. His style of playing has probably been more influential on drummers in the last 30 years than any other drummer on the planet. I know when I play there's a ton of Weckel. You just can't help but to start to try your best to play those beautiful, you know, relaxed, fluid, floppy fills around the kit that Weckel's fantastically known for. He's an incredible drummer. And when I listen to Weckel, it's just perfection and beauty. His drum kit sounds beautiful. His licks always sound great. He sounds so relaxed. I've seen him play many a times. And even though he's mentioned so many times and he has had such an influence, I don't really think he still gets the dues that he does. He doesn't get mentioned in the same breath as a Vinnie Colaiuta. He's not held up in that way, but I think he's as equal. It's just different. Later on, these guys have done much more kicking albums. They're not pushing the boat out innovation-wise. We know exactly where we're at with this stuff. But on here, this is a live album, live double album, they really do play. And there's some really funky playing on here. Weckel's also played percussion and drums at the same time. There's a nice Latin American tinge to it. Really great. The band is Dave Weckel and Tom Kennedy on bass, Steve Weingart on keys, Gary Meeks on saxophone. I saw this band live, and that's where I bought this album, was at the gig, because I was really impressed. This is a kicking album. In terms of a piece of art, this album I'm about to show you, I think is a really good example of modern jazz fusion, very tastefully done without the trappings of Fusac, and it's this album by John Patitucci, and that's my last album for this video, Communion. Patitucci has just grown as a player. I think after he left the Electric Band, he then hooked up with Wayne Shorter, and Wayne Shorter is obviously one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, and I think Patitucci grew as a player, and I find he's playing better now than it was back in the 80s, where he was a little bit showboaty. Now he's not. It's real art, and this album here is a big production. There's a lot of money behind it, but it's a very, very tasteful album. It's not a burning album. It's not like that. This is a very beautiful album. The lineup is Patitucci, then Joe Lovano tenor saxophone, Branford Marsalis soprano saxophones, Chris Potter's on saxophone. It's like 3 of the greatest saxophone players of the last 30 or 40 years. There's Tim Reese on flute, Luciano Souza on vocals, and the vocals on here are so virtuoso, it's quite incredible. Bruce Barth on piano, Brad Maldu on piano, another one of the great musicians, Eddie Simon on piano. And on drums, we have two of the greatest drummers of the modern era, Brian Blade and Horacio El Negro Hernandez. You know, both, what can I say about them both? Brian Blade's probably one of the greatest jazz drummers working in the world today. And El Negro is probably one of the greatest sort of Latin American drummers working in the world today. Anyway, I've hammered through those 10 albums. Those of you coming looking for something to listen to, they might be interesting for you. And if you go and have a listen to them or you know them, you please tell me in the comments how much you love them and all that type of stuff. I've really tried to pull out some artists I haven't spoken about before, and I've tried to have a selection of that is very different. And there's no real Fuzak there. It's not at all. So we're safe. Okay, we're safe. All right then, I've finished. We're done. I'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much.